The Italian social movement was a neo-fascist political party in Italy. Formed in 1946 by supporters of the former dictator Benito Mussolini, the MSI became the fourth largest party in Italy by the early 1960s. The party gave informal, local, and national support to the Christian Democrats from the late 1940s through the 1950s due to their shared anti-communist ideologies. The party saw internal competition for years. The party began led by the radicals under Giorgio Almirante. In 1987, Gianfranco Fini took over the reins of the party and even went on to transform the party into the National Alliance in 1995.
The MSI was a nationalist anti-communist party. It was formed by supporters of Benito Mussolini, many of whom had experienced the Italian Social Republic and the Republican Fascist Party. MSI openly stated its inspiration in fascist doctrine. It recruited old fascist party members and, for a long time, was active in promoting meetings and supporting neo-fascist groups all over Europe. Fascism is complex and not always taken the same. The most common to all of its subsets and seen in neo-fascism are a belief in authority of the state over the individual, emphasis on natural community, distrust for individual representation, limitations on personal and collective freedoms, exaltation of the strength of the state, collective identification, and a great national destiny, and acceptance of a hierarchical criteria for social organization. Italian fascism was perceived as a lesser evil than Nazism, especially in traditional strongholds of the South. It was associated with public works and integration. MSI has the following ideological characteristics that landed a spot in the extreme right party category. The MSI campaigns for dismantling of the welfare system, aggressive nationalism, a form of social Darwinism, and the restoration of the moral traditionalism, an authoritarian state, and more xenophobic policies toward foreigners. Extreme right scholar Pierre Ignazi labels the MSI as an old right-wing party that has already been polarized. It is important to denote the difference between new populist parties and this neo-fascism that MSI subscribes to. The far right has been impacted by more than just fascist ideology. There has been significant concern regarding immigration that affected radical right policies different than fascism. Secondly, there's definitely an argument behind new populism being their own emergent party and shouldn't be grouped together with neo-fascism. And thirdly, new populism and neo-fascism can be differentiated in that parties with a strictly fascist base, such as the MSI, have seen historically unimpressive electoral support. Radical right parties have done better at the polls on adopting populist rhetoric. Many joined MSI because it defended the fascist worldview. MSI activists preferred the label of fascists as self-description rather than the label of right-wing extremists. In an interview with a former MSI supporter, Salvatore says, "We young MSI supporters had taken that side not simply because it was a right-wing party, rather because we had assimilated the fascist idea, the original idea of fascism and the fascism of the Repubblica Sociale Italiana."
Fascism is the only ideological base for the extreme right. It is the only ideology more or less unanimously recognized as an extreme right ideology. Fascism fits the anti-establishment beliefs of the typical extreme right parties. Up until the 1970s, all extreme right groups and parties had referred to and were inspired by the most influential party of this tendency in Europe, the MSI, which is patently a neo-fascist party. MSI is also noteworthy for their informal, local, and eventually national support to Christian Democrats from the late 1940s through the 1950s, sharing anti-communist ideologies. However, in 1960, MSI teamed up with the moderates to form a necessary part of the parliamentary majority, leading protests that led to the fall of the Christian Democratic government. The MSI proved to be the most successful party to explicitly combine neo-fascism and the extreme right. They garnered over 5% of the vote in every election in the 1980s. Due to Italy being under fascist rule, the dictatorship of Mussolini, forming a fascist party was hard to do because of the post-war Italian constitution, as well as agreements with the Allied powers. The MSI had to adapt a fascist doctrine into a democratic system, designating themselves as neo-fascists. The fascist ideals of the parties were replaced with more traditional conservative views during the leadership of Gianfranco Fini, as radicalism does not win you seats. Southern Italy is known for being more receptive towards fascism, while Northern Italy is known for their identitarian politics and independence movements. The two most prominent leaders of the MSI were Giorgio Almirante and Gianfranco Fini. Almirante was the first president and founder of the MSI. He was president from 1946 to 1950 and again from 1969 to 1987. Almirante was replaced by Augusto de Marsanich in 1950 due to his strong anti-NATO stance. Almirante's first presidency saw the MSI win 7 deputies and 1 senator in 1948. His second presidency saw the MSI almost double in the 1972 election, but also lose roughly 200,000 members in the 1976 election. Almirante sought to bring the MSI into competition with the Christian Democrats during his second presidency, and did so by attempting to historicize fascism by getting rid of the party's fascist symbolism, such as the black shirts and Roman salute, as well as his implementation of the double-track strategy, which put anti-communism at the heart of the MSI's ideals. Fini was the president of the MSI from 1988 until 1995, when the party merged with the National Alliance. His presidency was initially very pro-fascist, but following the merging of the former Christian Democrats with the party, a noted shift toward traditional conservative ideology took place. Fini is notable for his legislative acts, such as the Bossi-Fini Act, which restricts immigration, and the Fini-Giambardi Act, which punished drug users based on the amount of active ingredients in the drugs they were arrested with. His political career came to an end when the new party, the Future and Freedom Party, received 0.5% of the vote in the 2013 elections.
The MSI agenda followed a trend of becoming more moderate from the 1960s on. It wasn't until Gianfranco Fini took over in 1987 that it made decisive changes in policy. In contrast to other far-right parties in Europe, which increased their power in the late 1980s, the MSI chose to not campaign against immigration. Party support for MSI dipped in the late 80s and early 90s. Although the party was for a long time preoccupied with fascist rhetoric, the party under Fini distanced itself from this in the early 1990s to focus on contemporary Italian issues. In 1995, Gianfranco Fini transformed the party into the National Alliance, formally dissolving the MSI. The NA outspokenly rejects fascism, as well as any kind of totalitarianism and racism. The National Alliance offered the image of democratic, post-fascist, right-wing party and marginalized the old MSI. The National Alliance gained power in Parliament in the elections of 1994, winning 13.5% of the vote and 6 cabinet posts. So in conclusion, as a direct heir of fascism, MSI's political programs stress traditional values, law and order, and hostility towards social minorities and civil liberties. The MSI represents an old right-wing neo-fascist party. The MSI is historically the basis for bringing together fascism and the extreme radical right parties. And despite success in the 1960s, the party lost support and was forced to moderate in the early 1990s to gain broader voter support. That's the Italian social movement. Thanks for listening.